Hi, I'm Dustin Wright, a seminarian at the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia and a candidate for ordination in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA. I also recently completed a year at the Lutheran Office for World Community, which is a joint ministry between the ELCA and the Lutheran World Federation, the LWF, that carries on advocacy work at the United Nations in New York City. One focus area throughout my last year in New York was the post-2015 development agenda. And thus, folks at the LWF Youth Desk asked me to speak with you all today about how the post-2015 development agenda interfaces with the global climate justice movement. This is an exciting topic, and thank you all so much for having me. Thank you as well for taking the time to engage in the important ministry of advocating for climate justice. There's one thing I'd like you to take away from my brief presentation today. It's that the next 2 years are an absolutely critical time for the climate justice movement, when robust advocacy on behalf of God's creation and those most affected by its degradation is more important than ever. That's because between today and September 2015, two global conversations that have been going on more or less separately for over a decade at the United Nations and elsewhere will merge. For one, there's a conversation regarding the Millennium Development Goals, and there's also a conversation regarding sustainable development. In the remainder of this presentation, I'll summarize both of these conversations, outline the process of how they will merge over the next 2 years, and conclude with some brief suggestions about how you can get involved. First, let's discuss the Millennium Development Goals, frequently referred to as the MDGs. In 2000, world leaders gathered together to create the Millennium Development Goals, 8 goals broken into 21 specific, measurable targets to be reached by 2015. In my opinion, this was a world-changing event, the first time humanity collectively made specific promises about how it would develop over its next 15 years. The good news is that the world has been largely successful in reaching these goals, or at least progressing towards them. We've cut in half the number of folks living in extreme poverty, as defined as living on less than $1.25 a day. We've also reached a parity between the percentage of girls and boys attending primary school. And we've even made great advances in combating infectious diseases like HIV, AIDS, and malaria. This is great news. But on the other hand, progress towards achieving the MDGs hasn't really spread evenly across all countries in the world. And issues like inequalities and environmental degradation are worse than ever. Every year, progress towards achieving the MDGs is evaluated by the UN, and now that the deadline year of 2015 is rapidly approaching, member states at the UN are beginning to discuss what will follow the Millennium Development Goals. Now, alongside, but somewhat separate from the MDGs discussion over the last couple of decades, has been a conversation about sustainable development. It's important to highlight here that sustainable development doesn't just mean something that's environmentally sustainable. Since the first UN Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, sustainable development has been defined by the international community as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Once again, I'll read that one more time. Sustainable development is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Sustainable development, therefore, is comprised of 3 specific and mutually reinforcing pillars: economic sustainability, socio-political sustainability, and then environmental sustainability, in no particular order. Some individuals and groups, especially many indigenous communities, argue that there should be a 4th pillar, cultural sustainability. So let's look at this graph and kind of explain this. For instance, if your country were able to immediately convert 100% of its energy production to renewable resources, but that energy remained extremely expensive, it wouldn't be economically viable and therefore could not be sustained. Likewise, even in a country that does produce cheap renewable energy, if a quality education isn't accessible to all individuals, regardless of their socio-political background, many folks may not be able to find jobs and therefore afford to purchase even the cheapest renewable energy. Now finally, if an extremely equitable society is sustained primarily by cheap energy from the burning of dirty fossil fuels, the resulting climate change wouldn't make that model of sustainable development. Uh, wouldn't make that a model of sustainable development either. Recognizing that much of the progress under the Millennium Development Goals was not achieved in a sustainable manner, at the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012, 20 years after the first Earth Summit, member states tasked the United Nations with creating a new set of sustainable development goals, often referred to as the SDGs. While this process is ongoing and you can follow online via the UN Sustainable Knowledge Platform, it was recently announced at the opening of the 68th session at the UN General Assembly that the SDGs will be combined with the wider post-2015 development agenda to create one new definitive and sustainable set of targets for global development to be adopted by UN member states at a high-level summit in September of 2015. So wow, I know that all seems pretty complicated. But in summary, a new plan for global development is being created over the next 2 years. Whether or not it can be a truly sustainable plan that helps lift folks out of poverty while protecting God's creation is in part up to you. First, it's essential that you help educate your friends and family about the Millennium Development Goals and the post-2015 development agenda that will hopefully succeed them. What will follow will be a series of links to resources that can help you do just that. You can also participate in the My World Global Survey and the World We Want 2015 platform to make sure leaders know that you and people in your community want a set of global development goals that protects God's creation. Both those are web platforms for you to sort of participate in sort of a democratic process of developing new goals. Finally, it's not just at UN headquarters in New York City where decisions are being made. In fact, most decisions are made by national governments in their own capitals, and those decisions tend to be much more important. Therefore, make sure you let your national leaders know as well that you care about God's creation. Once again, my name is Dustin Wright, and thank you so much for listening. Advocating for climate justice is such an important ministry, and I'm so thankful that you're taking part in it. Thanks.